Leo, I know there's so many different places we could start, but you wrote a book about the turning point in people's lives. So let's start there. What was the major turning point in your life?
I guess when it comes to the the tipping points of my life, I would say like there are two big ones. One was really early on. I was adopted by a white middle class family in Brazil, and that made my entire experience in the first few years of my life a bit different from lots of people that look like me. For context, Brazil is a black majority country, and I was also living in a world of like private schools and then occupying lots of spaces that people who look like me were not there. And I think that created a lot of the multicultural element that became a strong part of my life because after all these years, I have now lived in 12 different countries. I have now worked with like so many different cultures. And I could see that within my own household and within like how multiracial my own family was. Um, and then the second tipping point happened later down the line when I was 19. My father passed away. And I think my father, he was really engaged with social projects, and he was someone that inspired us to do a lot of social work. And I think that inspires a lot of my professional purpose because I feel that by making choices that are also driven by those values is a way of keeping him alive. And I think that's how I ended up working in the United Nations for a good chunk of my career, living in countries at war, working with like lots of food food related issues such as hunger and poverty later down the line.
12 countries, working for the United Nations. Your career is just incredible. We're going to dive into that a little bit. But first, I want to ask you, I know at 24, you wrote that you wanted to impact a billion people. What was it like creating a goal that was that huge? And did people believe it? Like, how did you get through that?
Yeah, no, people did not believe it. I think back in the days, there was this big movement for organizations mainly to have BHAGs or big, hairy, audacious goals.
Yeah.
And then I was inspired by it at the time. I was also leading a large student organization in Brazil. So I was leading 5,000 people, an organization called ISAC that promoted a lot of international volunteering and work around social issues around the world.
Mm.
And then I think that that is a way of when I wrote a billion people, it's not like I have a calculator and I'm checking every day and like seeing and then I'm discounting the people that I think I impacted negatively to see like what's going to happen. But it is a way of keeping my ambition to reach more and more people with my work, with the things that I believe in. And particularly nowadays that I work more with leadership, and I have witnessed a lot of poor leadership around the world. I also believe that lots of people can be impacted by the outcomes of a more collective, participatory leadership building. So, in a way, for me, that keeps my mindset of trying to expand more and more my initiatives and also try to work with people in more and more continents, more and more settings.
Leo, one thing that really strikes me is you spent over a decade working to end poverty and hunger with your work at the UN. Um, what did it teach you or show you that about the world that most of us never really get to see?
I guess my work with poverty and hunger starts right after I graduated. So I went to do an internship at the Grameen Bank. It's an organization that was the 2006 Nobel Peace Laureate, along with its founder, Muhammad Yunus, in Bangladesh.
Hmm.
And that moment was really revealing to me. And I think this is also a lesson that I took from the UN because I could see how people's lives were changed with like microloans and how they managed to change a lot of the circumstances in which they were in, and that created this strong belief in me of never doubting human beings' capacity, like never doubting human beings' capabilities, or like just understanding beforehand what are the resources that they have available, what are the systems that they have of support, and so on. So I think that as I worked in countries like Mozambique or Democratic Republic of the Congo or Yemen or Jordan, all of this became really salient to me later down the line. And I think another thing that I take that is really special from my UN experience is that I think your relationship with a supervisor makes a lot of difference in the way that you can have a good professional experience. And I think that I was lucky to have had like lots of good mentors and people that inspired me at an early stage of my career, to make good decisions and to have criteria and critical thinking in order to observe which way to go. So I would say I always loved the multicultural element of the UN and how diverse my colleagues were. But I would also highlight that that experience of having had mentors at an early stage really hit home for me. Like, and it was really important later down the line as I started to work more and more with leadership, particularly.
That actually is a good transition. There's a lot of amazing work it sounds like you were able to do, both in your development and then the work that you did out in the field. But eventually you did leave the UN. You left the United Nations in an institution where most people spend their whole careers trying to get into. And going to the Kennedy School in the United States, and now this down this road in that discovery process, to teach, to educate, and be an educator. What Walk us through that decision? What were you walking toward, and what led you to get there?
That was an important milestone in my career for sure. I had already been the United Nations World Food Program working with hunger and poverty for a few years at that point. I was living in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I I was witnessing a lot of stubborn issues that, regardless of country, I would see that were related to hunger and poverty. And obviously, there are policies that work a lot better, and some countries that do a lot of good work regarding the politics as well of like
Mm.
managing hunger. And I think Brazil was an example of that back in the days. But I could also see reoccurring issues, and I really wanted to understand the deep-rooted values of it. So I applied to Harvard and to do a master's in public administration at the Kennedy School because my keyword was inequality, and I wanted to understand inequality from a macroeconomic perspective, from a sociological perspective, from a generational perspective, from the perspective of racism, of sexism, every type of inequality. And once I got there, I ended up falling in love with a particular approach to teaching, which was experiential learning, and particularly the adaptive leadership classes, which are very popular at the Kennedy School. Then I think that having the opportunity of being in a space where you could discuss some of those deep rooted issues and having witnessed like people changing values or exposed to new perspectives really made me think about this idea of like, oh, I could actually be facilitating these environments. I could actually be in those rooms, um, contemplating all those different values that are at stake, all those clashes that are happening that require adaptations, that require change, that, as we say, go below the neck. That is not simply rational, but it's entrenched. Um, so because of that, I started to teach with lots of mentors and do more and more research. And over time, while like I'm so passionate about the UN mandate and everything that I witnessed from the organization, I'm still a fierce supporter. I realized that my passion lied in teaching. It's an exercise that has been really fulfilling, and I think that I hope to go back and to work with the UN mandate in the future once again. But I think that right now my passion and my focus lies in learning how to teach leadership to become a leadership pedagogy expert.
Your experience with that, to your point, is the UN seeing ground level changes, working with a structure within the UN, seeing changes, and then working in the Kennedy School and seeing that experiential learning come to life, and then doing so at your current university where you teach, University of San Diego. All of that experience encompassing, I'm curious, what do you think actually causes a person to change? What do you think is the root source of what causes a person to change?
So when I wrote my last book, Diaries of Transformation, um, I talked to people exactly about this question of what was one point that changed your life forever, or like one moment or one period that changed it forever. And I interviewed and anonymized their stories.
Mm,
And a strong feeling that I had during that process was that a good change framework is actually built from the inside out when you're talking about inner change, right? So I tried in the workshops that I had to launch the book of asking probing questions as a way of interviewing and like investigating what are the aspects that actually are criteria that you should utilize to make a change. So some of those criteria might involve questions such as what were the most powerful moments that you had in your life? The moments that if you had to be like a river of your life, which is an exercise that I usually do with students, what are the obstacles? What are the rocks that were in those rivers? What are the bends? And all those elements that are also part of it. And then what were some of the most successful changes that you have had thus far? What are some of the most unsuccessful changes that you also witnessed, like moments in which your life changed for the worst? So there's some elements there about how you capture and experience each one of those changes that will give you clues to build your own change framework. And if you go to like Angela Duckworth, for example, she talks
mhm,
about grit and
mhm,
resilience and how important it is. And I would say like that is the most important aspect that I witness is most like the resilience that you have to also endure all those different elements that might be going around you, because a lot of those might be external
mm,
and if harder to control, such as the passing of a loving one, such as like losing a job, or a big crisis that might like the one that are happening now, like with lots of layoffs, for example, in the tech sector. And I work with lots of people in that sector. So there are lots of external elements, and I think like resilience and grit are prerequisites for a good transformation. And at the same time, it depends on like what do you want to change and why, what is the purpose behind it, and that answer needs to be yours.
Leo, you've had such a unique perspective because you've lived, you've worked in so many different places and so many different cultures, and you've studied change, you know what it looks like. What has that taught you just from a global perspective? And what does change and success and failure look like in different cultures? Do you notice differences?
I would say yes, there are definitely differences. What I can say from my experience in the US, having been here for like the last 4 years, is that I have never thought so much about money as I have had since I came here. And I think there are different reasons for that. I think like usually the cost of living. I think like overall, it's also about like what I also learned a lot here is the innovation, the creativity, the resourcefulness, the melting pot of like so many different cultures and like so many different perspectives coexisting in one place, such as the US. And that is something that I really appreciate having here and like witnessing um, in this country. And that's also like it's funny because when I was growing up, I didn't have a lot of ideas about my future, but I would always picture teaching at a US university because I always connected that image with excellence of like openness and the capacity to hold lots of the conversations that I hold in my classroom today. So it has been a wonderful journey in that sense, and I could witness in my life lots of other ways of measuring success too. So for example, I guess the first time that I felt this really strongly was when I lived in a Muslim majority country, and I could see the difference like in perspectives when it comes to like what are the ambitions that people have, what are the behaviors that are frowned upon, or like the behaviors that are encouraged. And then I lived in Buddhist countries too, and then like there's a difference of like how humility shows up, like how you should be humble and how you should talk about yourself and your achievements in a different way. So I think that everywhere has its own touch, let's say. But what I've witnessed more here has made me grow exceptionally as a person, especially like the few years that I had in Boston were pivotal.
Leo, we have a closing tradition on the podcast, and that is to ask each guest what it means to live a life well led. I think that's the purpose of this podcast, really, is for our own curiosity as well as for our audience, really trying to get to the heart of what it means to live a life well led. So, in your opinion, what do you think?
I think there are three parts of the answer, right? So, what I think overall should factor into everyone's vision of like a life well led is a contribution to a social issue or to a bigger issue that might be part of your community or other communities, but something that you're passionate about or something that you would like to change. And I think that is essential because it only works if like this whole structure only works if people are dedicated to solving some of those complex issues because it's not a matter of waiting for the government to do it. It's not a matter of waiting for a couple of organizations to do it. Those are complex adaptive challenges that demand the participation of various stakeholders in order to do that. So to nurture that within yourself and to think about what is that cause, regardless of like whether it's like having a pet shelter, or like supporting a pet shelter next to you, or whether it's talking about an issue that you're passionate about or that is part of your story. That's one point. The second point, I think it's more about taking more time to understanding what matters to you and then observing and assessing like every every bend of your river or every step of the way, what matters to you the most. So the capacity of like constantly reflecting on what is happening will also give you the capacity of being more resilient about different things because there are moments in life in which like it will not be as happy as other moments, but it's important that you do reflect on why exactly you're living that moment or why exactly you're making that sacrifice so it still connects with something bigger. And the last one that I would say is just in terms of a life well led, right, is that I strongly believe that leadership is a collective endeavor. And I think that a lot of times those models of like individualized leadership or like excessively focus on like the influence that someone might have on the system, I strongly believe that like it's about uh, a, a more participatory approach. So when you talk about life well led, I always think about what are the communities of support, what are the people that you love, who are these people that you care about, and how is your relationship with them? How are you spending time with them, or how are you investing in those relationships? Because this will inevitably pay a cost later down the line, right? So the grant study, which is like the longest study about happiness, also like created at Harvard, talks that like the quality of your social relationships will likely determine a lot of uh, the wellness that you're going to experience later down the line. So I think this is also pivotal to take care of, regardless of what you're doing for yourself and what you're doing for the world. Is like, who are the people that you're doing this with?
Beautifully said. Leo, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story, taking the time, and of course for the incredible work that you're doing across the globe. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for being a part of this. I'm glad we connected years ago and able to make this happen.
Thank you so much once again, both of you, and to everyone that's been listening. So I really wish you all the best in your journey too.